started to stay up here this morning because I got a lot jammed on my little cards, and so it'd be easier not to shift them around. It's enough this morning that I'm preaching on Paul because some of you know that I like to spend my life arguing with Paul. And yet, there's the book of Romans. And this is the Sunday when I traditionally, wherever I've been throughout the years, like to take a moment to focus on the state of the church where I'm pastoring. But not just that, it's the larger church. And today, because of Paul the Apostle's writings in Rome, I'm going to say it's beyond that. Now, all you need to remember today, you have a part, and it's very simple. I always say to couples when I'm getting ready for marriage, you only have to remember 2 words. I'm going to tell you what to say. That is that when we come to the blessing of the rings and I ask a question, all you have to remember is these rings. And if you forget that, you've blown the whole service, so don't feel any pressure. So, the only words you need to remember this morning when I get ready to key you up is, we are more than conquerors. Let me hear you say that. We are more than conquerors. Good. Hold on to that. I'm coming to that about halfway through, so just get ready, okay? Some people say that Romans was the highlight of Paul's writings. Many people love this book. People like Martin Luther were deeply moved by this book. Even John Wesley, whose heart was warmed in studying with the Moravians. I find it oftentimes confusing and sometimes even convoluted, but there are moments of clarity here that are just magnificent. So I could not pass this text today. The last piece of it, of course, is you've probably heard me, since coming here, preach over and over again at funerals. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. But this piece gives us a reason to hope. And in this world presently, we need to have the capability and the reason to hope. Because just as Paul was experiencing a world that seemed pretty bleak for those who would follow Jesus and was trying to give hope to the church, I think in this text, he gave all of us reason to hope. It's set in the context of suffering. You see, for Paul, he had that theology of the cross that was always present. That if you're going to follow Jesus, if you're going to truly follow, you got to get ready. Because with that comes pain and distress. With that comes hardship. You could ask this guy, were he present today? Because after all, this is someone who was thrown in jail. He was almost killed by the disciples in Jerusalem from the get-go. He was shipwrecked. He got bit by poisonous snakes. You name it, it happened to Paul. And yet he could write such glorious words as in this, what we call the 8th chapter. There are 3 reasons he lists here for us to have the capacity to hope. Again, not just us, but for the nation we live in. We have not been through our better days of late, at least in the political landscape. But it's also beyond that. It's for the world in general, for the church universal, that we need to hear these words. And he starts out with that wonderful feminine expression that the creation itself is experiencing pain because the creation itself is in labor. None of the other sexist writers that come through the scriptures would dare use such a piece of language like Paul. And we thought Paul was the epitome of the sexist. Did you hear that? All of creation is in labor. It is groaning. And what is that about, by the way? It's about the fact that creation itself, because in the very beginning, and he would go back to the Genesis stories of the Adam and Eve. But we know, if we kind of follow the scriptures through, that sin's not about Adam and Eve, two figures that someone was passing along the narrative about early on, because the story is about who we are, how we fail, how we overreach. We meet our own trees. Hey, if you pick that fruit, you'll be like God. And so, over and over again, we reach to be more than human because we're not satisfied to be human. And because of that, Paul says, because humans are never satisfied with being humans, creation itself is held hostage. We have, throughout the ages, at every period of time, found ways, it's just gotten more drastic in the last century, but we have found ways not to be stewards of creation, but to exploit creation. And we are paying a price, and the price will continue to grow. But Paul says this, that creation is groaning to be free. It's groaning to birth something. And what is it waiting for? It's waiting for us, humans, to grow up and see themselves as beings made in the image of God and begin acting in the glorious way to which we have been called. Wow. It's waiting for us. So when I'm out walking, and Chris and I were out walking up on Pine Island north of Sam's house, and we were going through the woods and around the big holding tanks, and we sat on these stone barriers up at the upper end of the kiosk, and we just sat there in the sunshine and the cool breeze, and we thought, how glorious is this? And we don't even hear waves lapping on a beach, or I'm not on top of this Smoky Mountain. But it was a glorious day. Creation in itself, its intricacy, is so wonderful, so fascinating, so powerful when we sit there and experience it as it is. Paul said that's a reason for hope, because God is working and something wonderful is in the process of being birthed. And we're a part of that process, if you will. He also says, look, there are times when God is so with you that even when you're so jammed up and you're in such great pain and you're in circumstances where you can't see the way out and despair seems overwhelming, even in those times when you are hurting so badly that you can't give expression to the pain you feel and all you could do is grunt and groan. I don't know what they call it in Florida. That's what we used to call it in mountains, grunting and groaning. The Spirit knows the pain you feel, where you are on the journey, and the Spirit will give utterance, that is, give words to the pain before God, which is a prayer in itself. So sometimes when I'm on the front porch rocking and complaining and groaning because I can't find the words for all that I feel. And this past year, there's been a few of those, with some of the family stuff we've been through. I just rock knowing that somehow I may not be poet enough to find the words, but God knows what's in my heart and the pain that I feel and the comfort I need. Powerful stuff when you stop to think about it. I need to move on, don't I? Second point is this. And here comes another point I've spent my life arguing with my mom over. I'm sorry if you get tired of that. We've always had great theological conversations. It's just that she was always right and I was always right. Here comes that word, predestination, that makes us all cringe, because when we come to this text, we misread it. And it's okay. Some of our Reformed brothers and sisters misunderstood it as well. Because we always move to that place that they help to define. Oh, well, it's saying here that, that there are those who are damned and those who are saved. And, well, look at that. Now, that's not what predestination is in this case. Please don't go there. What it says in this case, the reason that Paul would use this particular verbiage is it means that from the very beginning of everything, that God was determined to have relationship with the earth and all that dwells therein. That from beginning, God decided that God would not walk away from us no matter what. And so, it says God knows how all this is going to turn out, whether you do or not. Because God is not walking away from you ever. God is not walking away from creation ever. God is always, forever, and all times on the journey with us in the cosmos. Now, there are scriptures in the Hebrew, there's text in the Hebrew scriptures that make us scratch our heads. There's a whole thing where early on, God wishes that He hadn't made creation because things have gotten so bad. There's also the text where I believe it probably was it Abraham who was bargaining with God? Well, if I could just find X number of righteous people, and it keeps getting further down and down. The bargaining process. But throughout the scripture, the word is that from beginning, God set things in motion because God wanted relationship with us, and God will not walk away. God, is that hopeful or what? The creation is groaning in labor, birthing something incredibly wondrous. And God has promised those of us that journey in all times and places that never will the holy walk away from that which has been made and loved and created good. Finally, the third reason to hope is that, that last text. And that is, nothing can separate us from the love of God, which means that we may feel all kinds of things, but we are never alone. Not as the church, not as the people of God, not as individuals, because there is nothing in all creation. And wow, the list got quite long if you remember Chris reading the text. Nothing can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. For we know that God is working good in all things. Don't take that as it's going to work out like you want it to because you're trying your best. That's not what it says. But God is working in all things to make this creation right. And for those of us who are called according to those purposes, God's working in all things to be with us. And because of this hope and these promises, and I kind of hate this because I'm not big on military language, even though the Bible is full of it since the Romans were everywhere. But here it comes. Why? It's not just that we're not alone. It's not just that we have reason to hope, but we are more than conquerors. Now, I'm going to jump off the cliff here, so stay with me. Get ready for that, okay? There's reason for us to hope. There's reason for us to rejoice. And there's reason for us to rejoice as we eventually move from this place over to another place. There's reason because let me take a minute just to break this down. You're going to have annual reports, so you can read all that stuff. I just want to take some things for you to think about. And let's start with a building. All my life, I've been plagued with buildings. What is it about buildings that they deteriorate? They get old, and then they take us away, our attention away from things. So I said this before. I got here when I visited, and the committee met, and I had to do a little sermon in this place for the committee. Had to try to make them think I wasn't as crazy as I am. Karen's laughing because she remembers. She thought I was crazy, but she says, well, it's not too bad. I looked around the property, and Chris and I were kind of smug. Wow, that property is well maintained. A lot thanks to Lauren and his work and those who help him. I thought, wow, this is great. I'm not going to have to fight a building. For once in my life, I'm going to be able to kind of finish out ministry and not have to fight a building. And then I went back to Dallas. I gave my notice on my apartment because I was sure this committee was so positive that I would eventually get the call, and you wouldn't think I was crazy either. And while I'm waiting to come to preach a trial sermon to see if I've got a job, Hurricane Michael is bearing down on Cocoa Beach on the Weather Channel. And I'm thinking, oh, there might not even be a church. And if there is, what about the building? And then in my first full year, we're bopping along, things are going well, we're celebrating our anniversary, and suddenly Irma pops up. And I take off to North Carolina, and I'm sitting from a distance watching, and they got these little tornado things that's pinpointing, and we're watching this and thinking, oh, goodness gracious, what's happening there? I get back, and of course, there's debris everywhere, but I think, well, we're intact. Thanks be to God. And most of you were intact, though you may have lost some pieces that you wished you hadn't have lost of whatever it was. Which brings me to Good Friday. Good Friday, I'm trying to get myself centered for a Good Friday service. And Friday morning, I'm in here, and there's an engineer walking around the property. And he's looking up in here, and he says, well, I think it's safe for now, but we need to monitor this. And in a few weeks, there were poles everywhere. So, we've had to address the building. Wow, can you imagine that? Roofs all replaced. Structure had to be, it's amazing. Yes, we're in debt, but when you think about all that had to be done, $100,000 wasn't a bad price. We came through this year. And this morning, if I had a song to sing in worship, it would be something like, we're still standing. Right? So we got some work to do. We got some stewardship work to do. Some people have been generous. The insurance company hasn't been. We're working on that. We're trying to get it worked out. But here's the point. We were blessed because we still have a space in which to do our ministry, and that's so important. Ministry itself is the key. It's not the building, it's the ministry, you understand. Worship is for me extraordinary because you give me incredible freedom that I don't always use, and you bless me as we try to plan and sometimes have a more creative edge. Back during Lent this last year, if you missed hearing those faith journey stories, they were absolutely fantastic. To hear where people have come from in their journeys and where they are walking and how they are walking, and the depth and the breadth and the richness in our community here of people who have had those spiritual journeys, a power that resonates in our community. And so many more of you have those, but you're too bashful to let me know that you'd be glad to share at some point. Expressions of care, I've mentioned that, take place here in ministry amongst the congregation. It's amazing to me. This past, we were off this past year, or I think maybe this past year, earlier, was at the Chamber of Commerce this past year that we had breakfast for, and went over and got to do our 5-minute elevator talk. And we were out at Fiesta Brevard, and we had the nicest booth out there, though we placed second because we couldn't compete with puppies from the Humane Society. Handed out a cup of cold water to runners. Basic stuff. Letting people know that there is a place in this community that cares about people beyond these walls that we're grateful to have. There's a choir. I don't want to be crude, but they work their butts off every Wednesday night. And then they come here faithfully. Holy Day services, they're here. We bank on them to be here, and they are. Such commitment to ministry and an expression of that. You know why? This ministry blooms and will continue to bloom, and I have hope because God is walking with us at will. Because in this place and in this community, we have been called out by God to be more than conquerors. Now I need to move forward quickly to finish this up. This past year, we've taken 4 mission offerings because in the United Church of Christ, there are 4 offerings that take place throughout the year that help lots of people in lots of places, including church starts that take place. There's OCWM, our church's wider mission money that's appropriated, but it's more than that. You know, there's the food pantry drive. There are the handouts we give to people who come by who are experiencing homelessness and need some food. There were the Christmas stockings that were taken out as we participated with the Salvation Army. There was the community garden where people went out and worked. It's truly amazing what takes place in terms of the ministry beyond these walls because we are more than conquerors. And then, of course, I couldn't get by with this, so I'd be up a creek without a paddle, is back over this way, there's a building that sometimes people come and I think they want to see the pastor, but they really want to buy something. Because there's the thrift store and all the volunteers who work in the thrift store. And the coordinating that takes place in terms of the work of the Women's Fellowship and the monies that come that support the ministry and all the good causes that comes out of that. And that work is done and people sustain that work because they are convinced that they have a place in the goodness of God and they are more than conquerors. And I'm about to get there. Stay with me. We're at the end. Gathering spaces and holy places. The Sandpipers meet here, who acknowledge people's journey to sobriety, and people affirm those as they walk on that journey to sobriety. They take place over in Sponsler Hall, and we're grateful to be able to provide that space. But now we've acquired, I think, 2 painting groups that come in and use and share their creativity and community that they experience. And of course, Susie keeps everybody knitting with great spirit as they come. And sometimes there's a number and sometimes there's a smaller number, but they're always there because Susie's always a teacher that she's been ever since she was born, I think, with patience. And so if you want to learn how to knit, you need to see Susie. Not only that, but there's other services that this church provides. There's services that when you get worn out, somebody's usually willing to bring some soup by. And then, when you get completely worn out, some days I think I'm almost getting there, there's a memorial garden for your ashes, and this year we've added a columbarium that's still got to be dedicated and landscaped. So either way you go, we can handle you. Art Kringle, colleague of mine in Dover who pastored Missouri Synod Lutheran Church, such a good soul, said he went over as a candidate in Baltimore for the church and said he just didn't feel good about it before he came to Dover. And he says, they were selling hard, and finally they said, well, wait a minute, we got one more thing to show you. And so they walked out back to the church to the cemetery, and they kind of did this. And they looked at him and said, well, we bury all of our pastors here. That'll sell every time. Oh, let's get on with it. You know why? Because we have hope. Because God is always with us. Creation is groaning to give birth, and we're a part of the birthing process. We have hope here to walk into the future because we are never alone, because God knows how things are going to end and walks with us. And as you have heard, we continue our ministry in this place because we have been called out to serve. And every Sunday morning I say it, to be salt, to give savor to the community. And we are light, and we should never put a bushel over our light. So if you ask me why I'm hopeful because that's the state of the church. I'm hopeful because I see you and your gifts. And I am hopeful because as I responded to the call so many years ago, I see you responding to your call. And know that together we are more than conquerors. Thanks be to God.